Hey everyone, we've been focusing on executive function, behavior, and emotional regulation this month. Today, I want to revisit a conversation we had with Dr. Stuart Ablon in March of this year because it's so practical and relevant to these topics. Here we go. Enjoy. Do you remember when your kids were in that completely normal but difficult stage in development called the terrible twos? We may not like it, but we kind of expect tantrums, defiant behaviors, and frustrations at that age. But when those behaviors follow kids through their school years, it's a different story. Our guest today, Dr. Stuart Ablon, is an expert in applying neuroscience, common sense, and compassion to changing difficult behaviors at home, work, and school. This is LD Expert Live. Welcome to LD Expert Live, your place for answers and solutions for learning differences, dyslexia, and attention challenges. I'm your host, Jill Stowell, founder of Stowell Learning Centers and author of At Wit's End, A Parent's Guide to Ending the Struggle, Tears, and Turmoil of Learning Disabilities. To get a free copy, go to parentsatwitsend.com. Let's say hello to Lauren, the director of Clinical Growth and Operations at Stowell Learning Centers. Good morning, Lauren.
Hello. Hello to everyone who is watching us live today. Let us know that you're here and where you're checking in from. We love to see all the places all over the country where people are viewing from. And today I am so excited to have Dr. Ablon here. He is a top expert in the field, and he will help so many parents like myself better understand our children's behavior struggles. So excited. I'll see you towards the end of the broadcast.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. Our guest today is Dr. Stuart Ablon. Dr. Ablon is the director of 𝗕cie Kids in the Department of Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital. He is also associate professor and the Thomas G. Stemberg Endowed Chair in Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Ablon is the author of the books Changeable, The Surprising Science Behind Helping Anyone Change, Treating Explosive Kids, the Collaborative Problem-Solving Approach, and The School Discipline Fix. We're going to post these in the chat for you because they are all excellent resources. Welcome, Dr. Ablon.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Well, we are really honored that you were able to join us today and so grateful for the work that you're doing to help parents and educators understand and deal with behavior in more compassionate and effective ways. So, how did you get involved with this area of challenging behaviors?
Well, I think it actually, for me, goes back to graduate school, where I had a bit of a sort of a split life as a aspiring clinical psychologist, where half of my time I was studying different forms of therapy to try to see what about therapy was helpful. And the other half of the time I was working with a real expert on what we call externalizing disorders. So kids who really struggle with disruptive, aggressive, defiant behaviors. And when I came out of graduate school, I felt like there had to be some way to sort of merge those two areas, how to help kids with these behavioral challenges, but also leverage what we've learned about when therapy works, why does it work? So that was sort of the beginning for me.
And, you know, I've heard you speak before, and really what you talk about kind of flies in the face of conventional wisdom, a lot of it. So let's talk a little bit about what conventional wisdom kind of, what path that takes us down as we work with kids with challenging behaviors.
Sure. So, the conventional wisdom when it comes to challenging behavior really amounts to a sort of a blame game. We tend to blame parents, first of all, but also teachers, any adults who are close to where challenging behavior occurs. If it's sort of on their dime, we tend to blame the adults, and we tend to assume that they're too permissive, that they're not what we call sort of contingent enough, that they basically are letting the kids get away with things. And then we blame the kids by assuming that kids are behaving this way on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And really on purpose for one of two reasons, either to get things or to avoid or get out of things. And that's been the conventional wisdom for years. And the reason that's so important, Jill, is because how we think about challenging behavior sets the stage for how we're going to intervene. So, if you think, hey, this kid is just trying to do this on purpose to get stuff like attention or get out of stuff that they don't want to do,
Mm-hmm.
it sends you right in the direction of common interventions, which are basically use of rewards and consequences and stuff like that, to communicate to a kid, no, this challenging behavior is not going to allow you to get what you want or to get out of what you want. In fact, life's going to get worse for you if you behave poorly. If you actually do what we want, life's going to be easier for you. So conventional wisdom sort of guides how we intervene. And that's true at home, it's true in schools, it's true all kinds of places. Despite the interesting fact that conventional wisdom, there's a funny thing about conventional wisdom, it's almost always wrong. It takes a while to learn why it's wrong and what's right instead. And it takes us a really long time, us humans, to let go of things and to sort of open our minds up to a different idea. But conventional wisdom around these kids has been disproven for decades now. I mean, it's been shown to be flat out wrong by research in the neurosciences.
And that's so interesting because in our field of learning and attention challenges and dyslexia, we see the same kind of thing. Students with dyslexia and other learning disabilities are often very bright, but they struggle to perform well in school. And so they're viewed as lazy or unmotivated. But the reality is that they're putting in far more mental effort than their more successful peers because they simply don't have the skills to do the job. And I would love for you to talk about behavior kind of in that realm of it being almost like a learning disability.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't just almost like, it really is. Learning disabilities, we've shown that kids are, delayed in the development of some crucial skills. It might be, in a reading disability, a skill of phonetically decoding words and things like that. But as you point out, we used to think those kids were lazy or dumb. Mm-hmm. And thank goodness, in most schools, most homes, we don't think that anymore. And by the way, we also used to blame people too. We blame parents for not reading enough to their kids and things like this, which, as a parent of 3 myself, I can tell you what nonsense that is, because you can read till the cows come home. And if a kid can't decode words, it's not going to help them. And similarly, if it comes easily to a kid, you don't even have to read to them, and they're going to take to it easily. Mm-hmm. So we've come a long way when it comes to those types of learning challenges. But, I think what you're describing here is it's a perfect analogy, because when it comes to behavior, it's the same issue. We used to think kids who struggled to read were lazy or dumb. We don't so much anymore, thank goodness. We still think kids with behavioral challenges just aren't trying hard enough to behave well. And if anybody hears me say this and they think, oh, I don't think we really think that. Well, wait a sec, though. What we usually do about this is all about incentivizing kids to behave better, which proves that we still think that the reason these kids aren't behaving well is that they lack the will to behave better. And that research I was alluding to has shown us that these kids, they don't lack the will to behave well. Just like you're saying with learning disabilities, kids with behavioral challenges, they don't lack the will to behave well. What they lack are the skills to behave well. Mm-hmm. And when I say skills, what I'm talking about is things like problem-solving skills, flexibility, frustration tolerance. And by the way, those are all cognitive skills. Right. Just a fancy way for saying, a thinking skill. So you can think about it just like a learning disability, except instead of reading, math, and writing, stuff like that, just think problem solving, flexibility, frustration tolerance. And to your earlier point, sometimes people will ask me, they'll say, wait a sec, are you trying to tell me that there aren't kids out there who just aren't trying hard to behave well? And I'll tell them, no, actually, I think there are tons of kids who aren't trying very hard to behave well. But you know who those kids are? They're well-behaved kids. Right. They don't have to try very hard. Just like some kids don't have to try very hard to read because it just comes naturally to them. Some kids, thankfully, as development unfolds, they get better at problem solving, flexibility, frustration tolerance, and it's just not hard for them to behave themselves well. But who's trying harder than anybody else in the home or the classroom to behave themselves well? The kid to whom it doesn't come naturally.
Right.
And so, you know, I feel very strongly, we're obviously going to talk about the what to do's later, but I think how you think about these kids is so crucial, because the last thing we want is a kid who's trying so hard to behave themselves well. The last thing we want is that kid to think about themselves that they're not trying hard enough, because what happens then is it sets in sets in motion this sort of set of beliefs where a kid comes to believe that, hey, I guess maybe I am lazy. I guess I'm unmotivated, not trying hard enough. I guess I don't care about other people. You know, I guess I don't take things seriously, or else I'd change my behavior, because that's the message they get. And I often I like to quote my 104-year-old grandfather here, who is the wisest guy I know. And one of his favorite phrases he uses a lot is, he says, if you give a dog a name, eventually they'll answer to it. If you give a dog a name, eventually they'll answer to it. And what that means for my work, really, I realized is, you know, if you treat a kid like they're lazy or unmotivated, don't care, aren't trying hard enough, well, guess what? We shouldn't be surprised when eventually they start to look like and talk like and act like a kid who's lazy, unmotivated, etc. So we got to be really careful. And, you know, even if we think that we're not thinking that way, how we're handling behavioral challenges often sends the not so subtle message that we do think a kid is lazy or unmotivated. Right.
And I just see such parallels with learning. Exactly the same thing. We even have kids that sometimes come to us initially and they say, oh, I'm just lazy. but they're really actually, oh, they've worked so hard, and maybe they end up giving up, you know,
And that's why I think that's an intervention unto itself. And I do this all the time when I meet with kids, is to tell them, hey, you know what, I just want to be clear about something. I think you've got all these great strengths and things you do really well, and I'll list some of them. And like everybody else, you know, everybody's got things they're working on. There's some things that don't come so easily to you. And here's what those are. That doesn't make you a bad kid. It's not that you're not trying hard enough. In fact, you're trying really, really hard. And this is just like if you struggled with reading. You know, I have families I work with where one sibling will have a reading disability, and everybody's very compassionate about it. And the kid with behavioral challenges doesn't feel the same way about their challenges. And so an intervention there is to say, you know how you think about your sister, that she has something she's working on? That's the same thing with you. There's just different skills. Hers is reading, yours might be, and I can list all kinds of examples, letting people know what's bothering you, staying calm in the midst of frustration, being flexible, you know, just examples like that. So how we think about these kids and how we help them to think about themselves is crucial.
Huge. And, you know, these skills generally aren't taught. So flexibility, frustration tolerance, problem solving. I mean, we just sort of assume that people can do that.
That's right.
And it's not just kids with behavioral challenges that struggle with those things, actually, but those skills aren't generally taught. They're just assumed. So how can parents and teachers address those?
Right. It's a great point, because, you know, you talked about at the beginning of today, you talked about the terrible twos, right? Most kids just sort of grow out of the terrible twos. But when we say that, what that means is they naturally develop some of these skills we're talking about. And it's not necessarily because we're trying to, you know, target those skills and teach them very directly. Just if development unfolds in the way that we want it to, sort of neurotypical development, a kid just begins to develop these skills. Now, could we do a much better job of being intentional about teaching these skills? By the way, for all kids, absolutely. Like, why wait until a kid experiences some behavioral challenges and shows us that they're struggling to develop these skills? What if we actually tried to help all kids develop these skills? And in schools these days, what people call social emotional learning is an attempt to focus on how do you practice those skills?
Mm-hmm.
How do we prioritize the development of problem solving, flexibility, frustration tolerance skills for all kids? And the good news is, yeah, there's a lot you can do to help kids build those skills, whether they're on track right now or whether there's a significant delay.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, one of the things about those kinds of skills, sometimes you think, oh, well, I have to have a special program or a special time to do it. But actually, they're life skills. They're all problems come up all the time. You know,
Right.
I know right now so many parents are struggling with, you know, their kids staying focused during, you know, during class, or spending too much time with video games, or, you know, I mean, it's just.
I'm smiling just because I've talked to two different families this morning, and those are two of the big challenges that they're experiencing. And I think, you know, what you're alluding to here, which is I couldn't agree more with, is those are naturally occurring problems.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no better opportunity to practice and develop problem solving skills than over naturally occurring problems. So, you know, the way you build these skills is not by, you know, taking out a workbook and practicing these hypothetical circumstances, or having kids get together in you know, small groups and practice the skills together. No, the best way to practice these skills is to take issues that are occurring during the course of the day and use a process that helps everybody involved model and practice those problem solving, flexibility, and frustration tolerance skills. And it's, you know, that's not just common sense. That's actually backed up by neuroscience, because, you know, to boil it down a little bit, you know, if you want to build or change any neural network in the brain, you actually have to activate that actual neural network.
Mm-hmm.
And artificial circumstances don't activate the same neural networks. So like you and I could practice a little role play here, but that same problem, if it occurs in real life for either one of us, different neural networks are going to light up in real life, which is why a lot of sort of skills practice doesn't transfer from one environment to the other. Now, the answer to that is train and practice the skills in the natural environments. Then you get around that. You activate the actual neural networks that are going to be needed in real life situations in the future.
And that, you know, as a parent, I'm sure you know this too, there's just so much going on. You've got, you know, kids have chores and activities in school and all kinds of things. And sometimes, and parents are working, and sometimes it just feels like I can't possibly have time to take the time and talk this through. But I look at it and I think, man, this pandemic has maybe given us that opportunity. We're all home. And so, you know, to have the opportunity to take the time, solve these problems in real time, and it's going to serve us for a long, long time if we take the time, you know.
I mean, as a parent of three myself, I can speak to the fact that, you know, it feels overwhelming at times to try to find any time to focus on these things. But the reality is that one of the biggest drains on our time as parents, and perhaps even more importantly, on our energy level and our spirit and our mood, is chronic challenges with our kids. And if you can put the time in to address them, you sort of buy yourself a lot more reserve in the bank. And I want to be clear that when I say put the time in, you know, we're talking about practicing problem solving. That's like having a 2-minute conversation, a 5-minute, maybe a 10-minute conversation. It's not, you know, an hour a day or something like that. It's little snippets of practice naturally throughout the course of the day that can save you all kinds of time the next day, for example. But I think one other thing, you brought up the pandemic. One thing that's really important to recognize right now is yes, it's an ideal time because we're home, so many of us together. But in another way, it's not a great time because the level of chronic stress is quite high. And these very skills that we were just talking about that you need, like right now in this pandemic, I mean, everybody needs flexibility, frustration tolerance, problem solving skills in much more abundance than we did prior. But the irony is when we're stressed, we humans, we have a harder time accessing those exact skills we need. Because those skills are the skills that the frontal lobe of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, the smart part of our brain, those are the skills that the smart part of our brain is used for. And when we are, quote, dysregulated, when we are stressed, we have a hard time accessing those skills. So it's both an ideal time right now and a really challenging time.
Right. Well, and I think we certainly have seen for kids who were already struggling, in our case, struggling in school, well, now this has just, in most cases, made that worse, and it's put it right under the parents' eyes so they can really see it. They're really dealing with it now. And so I would assume the same is true about children who really do have challenging behaviors, kind of chronic challenging behaviors. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about those kids and then about the collaborative problem-solving approach for working with those kids.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, kids with very challenging behaviors. So in other words, kids who really struggle in those skill domains, who have some big delays, so they could be 9 years old, but look like a 2-year-old in terms of flexibility. And by the way, that doesn't mean they're not unbelievably smart, but flexibility, they could be quite limited. Or maybe they're 15, but look like they're 6 in terms of, frustration tolerance, or general problem solving skills are significantly delayed. With kids with severe behavioral challenges, that's just gotten worse right now because the expectations are higher and that chronic stress makes it harder for people to access their skills. So this has been a particularly challenging time for those kids. And, the chronic stressors that the world is under right now, there's still, unfortunately, sadly, such disproportionate exposure to that stress. So there's so many kids, kids with trauma histories, kids of color, for whom this is, this is impacting it at far more severe, in far more severe ways, disproportionately. It's even more essential right now that we understand these kids accurately, that we see that they lack skill, not will, that we embrace that mindset. And then we're going to talk now about what do you do? Okay. But I want to be clear, it is so much harder, I think, to respond empathically and effectively to behavioral challenges than even learning challenges, which are already so hard. Because the thing that's different is, a kid who's struggling to read, you can try to hold on to that notion that you've now been taught this is about skill, not will. But their struggle to read doesn't necessarily push your buttons. It doesn't make you feel ineffective or feel like your authority has been challenged or you're disrespected, or in many cases that you're unsafe. Severe behavioral challenges, we adults get very dysregulated because we feel all those things. We feel disrespected, we feel unsafe, we feel ineffective. And then you have a dysregulated kid and a dysregulated adult, and now you're off to the races. So for us parents, for teachers, hold on to that mindset. This is about skill, not will. These kids are trying the best they can. That's going to help us stay a little calmer in the face of these challenges. But let's talk about what to do now. Do you want me to launch right into it?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Okay. So you alluded to the approach we teach is called collaborative problem solving. Started as a parenting approach many years ago and has now been applied in schools and all kinds of treatment places and all over the world, but started as a parenting approach. And it first starts with a mindset. And the mindset you've heard about now, easy way to sum it up is this, the philosophy behind the approach. Kids do well if they can. Not kids do well if they want to, which would mean we just got to make them want to, but kids do well if they can. If they could, they would. And if they're not, you heard it, it's about skill, not will, that's getting in their way. So first comes the mindset, kids do well if they can. Then what we do in collaborative problem solving is we try to drill down on what are the specific triggers that are leading to the behavioral challenges. And I can tell you, even in homes where there are incredible amounts of behavioral challenges, or classrooms, for instance, it isn't the case that there's no rhyme or reason to those behavioral challenges. There's usually reliable predictors to them, what we call triggers or antecedents, or in our world, we call those your problems to solve. And so one of the first things we do when doing an assessment is we try to figure out, what are those triggers and antecedents? What are the situations? Is it every time you try to get the kid to turn off the Xbox? Or is it every time you try to get them up in the morning to go get ready for class? Is it every time you try to get them to sleep? Is it over choice of food? What are the regular antecedents? Because those are going to be the focus of the problem solving efforts. And the other thing we try to assess is, what are the specific skills getting in the way? And we've talked very globally: problem solving, flexibility, frustration tolerance, but you can drill down in a much more specific way to figure out the specific skills that any particular kid with behavioral challenges is really struggling with. And there's a lot of resources that we provide on our website, for instance, or other ways to learn about how to figure out which skills they are. But I think for today, the most important thing I want to get to is, all right, you've figured out this is about skill, not will. You're embracing this new mindset. You've tried to identify what some of the antecedents are. What do? Well, in this approach, we try to make it simple for you. And parent to parent here, you only got 3 options, folks. Pick any problem you have, any of the ones I listed or ones I didn't list. You only got 3 options for how to handle any problem with a kid. And that's true in a home, a school, and anywhere. You can, in essence, try to make a kid do what you want them to do. You can try to work it out with a kid, or you can decide to drop it for now and handle it the way the kid wants it handled. And in collaborative problem solving, we call those your 3 plans. We call it Plan A when you try to impose your will and make a kid do what you want them to do. We call it Plan B when you try to collaborate to solve a problem. And this is an important phrase: not just solve a problem together with a kid, but together with a kid in a mutually satisfactory way. And we call it Plan C when you decide to drop your expectation. Not forever, but for now, strategically. So pick any problem, you only got 3 options. Plan A, impose your will. Plan B, solve the problem together with the kid. Plan C, decide to drop it for now. And how are you going to decide which of those plans to use? Depends what you're trying to accomplish. So, what I tell people is, look, Plan A, if you got a regular old kid who's pretty flexible, can tolerate frustration, has good problem solving skills, you can get away with Plan A if you want. With a kid with behavioral challenge who struggles with those skills, Plan A is often like lighting the match. So not only do you not end up often able to impose your will, so you don't even get your expectation met, but it often exacerbates things, often triggers meltdowns. And there's nothing about trying to impose your will upon a kid that helps them develop these skills that they're lacking either. And a lot of Plan A can really sour a relationship. And I alluded to this in the very beginning today. My whole career started studying what about helping relationships is helpful. And it's the relationship. So parents, teachers, if our relationships are strained with these kids, I mean, nobody's got any magic for you. You've got to prioritize the relationship. And if you do a lot of Plan A, the relationship takes a hit. So Plan A, trying to impose your will, often gets ugly on us, doesn't build skills, and the relationship takes a hit. Now, let me jump for a second to what we call Plan C, which I described as dropping it for now. I want to clear something up here. Whenever people hear this, they think, oh, that's just picking your battles, right? Not quite. Or they think, that's giving in. Not quite. Okay. Giving in, for instance, is when you try Plan A and it doesn't work and you sort of throw up your hands and bail. Plan C is not failed A leading to, okay, forget it. Plan C is when we adults are still in charge. It's when we adults are being strategic and we're saying to ourselves, you know what, we cannot work on everything all at once here. We got to prioritize. So I give you an example from literally an hour and a half ago from my clinical practice. So a kid who right now is having all kinds of violent meltdowns in response to attempts to deny technology use or get him off of technology, Xbox, things like this. And he's also been coming down in the morning and asking for pancakes for breakfast. Now, after several consecutive days of chocolate chip pancakes, mom had the audacity to suggest something with a little variety and maybe a little bit more nutrition in it. And another massive meltdown occurred for this very inflexible kid who came downstairs with his mind fixated on chocolate chip pancakes again. So, what we were talking about today is we got bigger fish to fry than chocolate chip pancakes for now. And so what that means is it's plan C. That doesn't mean ask him to eat something else. He starts to explode. You say, fine, you can have pancakes. No. That's giving in. Plan C is deciding at the outset, you know what? He wants pancakes. Just gonna make him pancakes. That's it. Mouth shut, just make him pancakes. Not forever, but for now. We'll start working on that later, but right now we got some other things to work on. That's plan C. So plan C calms things down. Okay, it doesn't build skills or anything. You haven't solved the breakfast problem, but you've sort of tamped down the general temperature in the house. So plan A, impose your will. Things might get ugly. Probably won't get your expectation met. Skills won't be built. Relationship takes a hit. Plan C, keep things calm, but you're not working on things. Now, the reason this approach is not just picking your battles, is picking your battles if you were just doing A or C. But remember, I described a third option to you. And it's really the heart of this approach, is what we call plan B. Plan B is when you try to collaborate together with a kid to solve a problem in a mutually satisfactory way. And when you do that, you are trying to work on this so that your expectation gets met, but it's done in a way that helps to keep a kid calm, builds relationship, and very importantly, is exactly where you practice those skills that we were talking about prior. So if your kid's struggling with problem solving, flexibility, frustration tolerance, plan B is the in vivo practice in those skills. Now, let me pause for a sec here and see, Jill, if you want to jump in with any clarifications or anything, questions before, of course, the big question is, how do you do this plan B thing, which is,
right.
Of course, is where we're going next, but let me see if there's anything to address in the meantime.
I love the approach of working together with the child to develop these, to solve the problems, because it truly is building those skills. And we're all about that at the learning centers, building the underlying skills that they need. But so often, I was a busy mom, getting my kids everywhere and dealing with all kinds of things. And so often we end up trying to micromanage everything and make everything fit, imposing our will, but because we're so busy and taking this time to really look at where they are and what their needs are and what our needs are. And that is exactly what executive function is. And so many parents come to us saying, I'm concerned about my child's executive function. Mm-hmm. Well, this is what executive function does. So I just love it. And I would love for you to
Sure.
dig into it a little bit more.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, our research has shown that when people practice, whether it's parents or teachers, practice this process that I'll walk people through now, and it only has 3 steps to it, okay? It's simple, but complicated, or simple, but let me put it this way, not easy. Simple, but not easy. But when you practice these 3 ingredients of problem solving with a kid repeatedly, what our research has shown is you will help that kid build their executive functioning skills. Now, one other cool piece of research we found is that when we adults practice these 3 ingredients with kids, guess who else builds some skills?
Right.
We do. We become more flexible. We become better at empathizing, perspective taking, coming up with flexible solutions. So it's sort of, both people involved in this are building skills. Mm-hmm. So let me talk about what it looks like, okay?
Great.
3 ingredients. First ingredient, far and away the hardest, which is why I'll spend the most time on it. We call it the empathy ingredient. Okay. Empathy does not mean to show you care, folks. Yes, we want you to show you care, but the word empathy actually means to understand. So the first ingredient of Plan B, your goal as the adult, is to understand. Understand what? Not the kid, their whole, everything going on for them. No. You're going to pick a specific problem to try to solve. Like earlier today, we were solving a remote school kid who was not turning on their camera during Zoom class, and as a result was getting poor participation marks in this class. So if that's the problem you're trying to solve, your goal in the first ingredient, the empathy ingredient, is to understand. Understand what? The kid's concern or the kid's perspective about this problem. In other words, why is it happening? What's up? Fill us in. And that's harder than it looks to do, because, by the way, most kids, if an adult comes up to them and say, hey, I want to talk to you about that Zoom camera issue, the first thing they think is, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. And they begin to shut down and to actually look for whatever they think we want them to say so they can get the conversation over with as quickly as possible. So when we teach Plan B, we teach people start with a neutral entry point. Something like, hey, I want to talk to you about the Zoom camera issue. Don't worry, you're not in trouble here. I just want to try to understand. Can you fill me in what's going on with that? Because it sounds like you've had the camera off. I bet you have a good reason. Can you fill me in? Notice all the things I did to try to help regulate the kid. You're not in trouble. I just want to understand. I know there must be an important reason why. And then just go into detective mode. And when you're a detective, what do? You ask questions. And if need be, you take some guesses. And if you hear anything from the kid, what you should do is reflect back to them. Do what we call active listening. Reflect back and say, oh, okay, I hear you. So you're saying you don't like staring at yourself all the time during class? And if they nod, resist the temptation to say, okay, I get it, and move on. That would be what I call drive-by empathy. Don't do drive-by empathy. Stick with it. Delve deeper. Drill down. Okay, so you don't like looking at yourself all the time on Zoom during class. Can you help me understand why? I mean, I think I probably don't like that either, but I want to hear what's going on for you. Can you fill me in? And literally just take guesses if need be, but ask questions, reflect anything you've heard back from them until you drill down till you feel like, aha, I see why you have your camera off. I really understand it. It makes sense to me. And when you reflect back what you've heard to the kid, they should start nodding and they should be with you and they should appear calm. And that's how you know you've done a good job with the first ingredient of Plan B. If you understand the kid's concern and perspective, they're calm and they're with you, then and only then, folks, do you move to the second ingredient of Plan B. And the second ingredient is where we adults get to share our concern. We heard the kid's concern or perspective. Now comes our time to share ours. Okay, but notice our concern or perspective, not our solution to the problem. We're so guilty of that, us adults. Don't jump to solutions. We heard their concern, share our concern. And try your best to avoid saying something like, I get it, but here's the thing. Because but here's the thing says is their concern is less important than ours. No, say to them, okay, I heard you, and here's what I'm worried about, or here's what my concern is, or my perspective is, and just fill them in on why you're having this conversation in the first place. And the reason you see me doing this thing with my hands, folks, is if you're following along here, this is how you tell if you're doing Plan B. You see, if you only have one set of concerns on the table, and it's the adults, what plan are you headed straight for? Plan A. If you only have one set on the table and it's the child's, what plan you headed for? Plan C. How do you know you're doing Plan B? You must have both sets of concerns on the table. This is the hard work of problem solving. Actually, believe it or not, the hardest part is not coming up with a solution. It's defining the problem. And how do you define a problem? Get real clear on the kid's concern first, concern or perspective, and then yours. And only once you have both and the kid's still with you, then do you go to the third ingredient of Plan B, which is now you're going to collaborate to solve that problem. Solve it how? In a way that addresses both sets of concerns. So to recap a little bit here, first ingredient, get the kid's concern on the table. Second ingredient, share your concern. Only once you have both, move to the third ingredient, and that's where you can say to the kid, I bet there's something we can do about this. So let's recap what we've learned. and then say to them, so what do you think we can do so that we can address both sets of concerns? Mm-hmm. Now, an example that I'm drawing from just a little bit earlier this morning here, the kids' concern was that when they're looking at themselves in Zoom, all they can think about is how they look and how other people are thinking they are looking. And in particular, this one kid right now has a little bit of a rash too, and is worried about whether everybody's looking at what's on their skin. And so they can't concentrate at all. Is that a good concern? Absolutely. Now, what have we heard from the teacher? Well, their concern is that they can't tell if the kid is with them at all or following things at all when they can't see them. They're using the visuals to tell, is the kid with them? Is that a good concern? Yes, they're both good concerns. So the third ingredient, what does it look like? I wonder if there's something we can do so that you're not distracted all class by worrying how you're looking, and, not but, and your teacher can tell that you're following them. And you can tell then the last thing you want to do here is you want to say to the kid, do you have any ideas? And try your best to zip it and give the kid time and space to try to generate a solution. Because again, this is where practice happens, folks. This is where you literally just invited a kid to practice flexible problem solving. And at that point, one of three things is going to happen. The kid's going to have a great idea, a terrible idea, or no ideas. And I always suggest to us parents, teachers, any adult, any idea a kid throws at us, I say the same thing. I always say, that's an idea. Best idea in the world, worst idea in the world. I say the same thing. That's an idea. Let's think about it together. Because here's more skill building, folks. Let's think about it. Would that work for you? Because I heard what's important to you. Do you think that would work for the teacher? Because I think we understand what their concern is. And do you think we can pull that off? Like, is that a solution that'll work? And if we tried it, would it cause any other problems? And as you were saying, Jill, this is executive functioning skills practice in action right there. All kinds of skills are being practiced when you're asking a kid to generate a solution like this and reflect upon the potential solution. So I just want to say, I'm making it sound easy. It's not. When you go try it, it's going to feel like slogging through the mud in the beginning. But keep in mind that when you slog through the mud of those three ingredients, there's tons of skills training built into each of the three ingredients. I mean, you're talking language and communication skills, flexible thinking skills, attention skills, working memory skills, self-regulation skills, emotion regulation skills, social thinking skills, a whole host of executive functioning skills, all are baked into those three ingredients. So you're not just trying to solve the Zoom problem, you're also practicing all kinds of skills.
And you know, as a parent or a teacher, you are also gaining so much insight into your kids. I mean, I've heard from so many teachers, their concern exactly that their kids aren't turning on their camera. And you know, most teachers are a little bit removed from when they were teenagers, you know, and so they forget how self-conscious those kids are, you know, and now they're in the spotlight. And as soon as you get a little bit of that empathy and understanding, you know, we also then can just approach things differently.
And you can see the relationship building that occurs.
Absolutely.
Via empathy. The first ingredient is empathy. And by the way, empathy, I think, is the greatest human regulator we have. So if you have a dysregulated kid and or a dysregulated adult, and that adult works really hard to empathize with the kid, the amount of regulation that occurs is remarkable. Kid becomes much more regulated, adult becomes much more regulated, and then you have something we call co-regulation occurs. Because dysregulation is contagious, but so is regulation.
Right.
And empathy is the most powerful regulator we humans have.
Wow. That is an incredible place to leave this. That's just such a great statement. This is LD Expert Live. I'm Jill Stowell here with Dr. Stuart Ablon. I think we probably better check in with our viewers in the chat. I know you have some fans out there who want to say hi to you, Dr. Ablon.
It's very nice. I'm glad people are joining us here and anxious to have some discussion.
Yes. So as a follow-up to your scenario that you just shared about the kid that didn't want to turn on his Zoom camera, we have been hearing this from teachers and parents a lot. And so Karen asked, so what if you ask the question, why don't you want to turn your camera on? And he or she doesn't know the answer. And this does happen with a lot of our unaware kids that, they haven't developed a lot of self-awareness, and they just say, I don't know, I just don't like it, or I don't want it. How do you continue to solve that problem with them if they don't have a lot of awareness?
It's a great question. What you don't do is proceed to the second ingredient and say, okay, well, you don't really know why you're not turning it on, but I really know why you have to have it on, because then that problem solving is going to go right towards plan A. So what you do, slow down. Don't proceed until you have some sense of what a kid's concern is. Well, I tell people, though, when kids say, I don't know, you know what? They don't know. And oftentimes right there, you're learning about a skill that might need some work, which is, for instance, identifying and articulating your concern or what's bothering you. So you, by and large, I alluded to this, you just become a detective and you go into educated guessing mode. And, I tell people, play a game of 20 questions or hot and cold, right? And say, well, okay, is it something about what you're seeing? Or is it something what other people are seeing? Just take broad category questions and tell them they can just nod their head or shake their head. You can say hot or cold, and basically just try to play detective to try to figure it out. And guess what? If you're wrong, if you identify the wrong concern, the solution's not going to work. So you'll be going back to the drawing board anyways. But basically just put yourself in the kid's shoes and say, what could it possibly be? Let's take some guesses here.
And is it okay if you're kind of left in that, that you might not in one conversation be able to identify the true problem? Is that okay?
Yeah, and thank you for pointing that out, because I really want people to know it is a rarity that plan B goes ingredient 1, 2, 3, yay, problem solved in one sitting. This stuff was magic, and I'm so glad I tuned in to LD Expert Live. No, there's no magic. It's hard work. You may have to slog away at a few conversations just to get a decent sense of what the kid's concern is before you even bring yours up. So it might take a bunch of conversations, which is frustrating. Although I will tell people this, if it didn't take a bunch of conversations, you wouldn't be building any skills, because no skills get built in a single conversation. It takes repetition. So it's okay that you got to go back to it and do it incrementally.
Absolutely. Just like, the brain training we do at the Learning Center. I mean, we always tell parents, can I bring them one time? Like, no, we're not going to develop the necessary skills in one session. Can I bring them once a month? No.
I think one of the things you're pointing out, which is really important, is whenever we talk about skills and skills training and skill building, we need to translate that. That means changing the brain. Right. I mean, when you have a new skill, you have built a new neuronal pathway in the brain. And we know how you do that these days. And it is all through repetition of a patterned process, which is why ingredient 1, 2, 3, again and again and again, is where you actually are literally carving new neuronal pathways in the brain.
Absolutely. Okay, we have kind of a long question and it got cut off, so I'm gonna skip to it. Andrea is from Vegas. She has a little guy, and I have a 5-year-old, so I can relate. Is a great little man, but really struggles when we shift attention from him to doing something else. If I answer the phone, if I'm watching a video, like she's trying to focus right now. If someone comes over and we're having a conversation, he gets in their faces and he has all the questions to ask. He wants to ask questions, and it sounds like divert attention. He goes and does everything he knows that he's not supposed to. Doesn't matter how much we've already talked about this. He really doesn't, and then this is where I have to get the rest of it. He doesn't really listen. Some days he is very defiant and challenging. How can we work on regulating ourselves and him?
Great and tough questions. I would say avoid the temptation to try to work on sort of global strategies for for him to listen better or to stay regulated, and instead stay focused on very specific problems one at a time. So, for example, I heard that the category of problems to solve is when you're doing something with him and engage with him, and then you have to go do something else, and he no longer has your undivided attention. That shift, which we psychologists call a shift in cognitive set, is hard for him to manage. And by the way, that's not that atypical at that point in development, but it sounds like he's struggling with it perhaps more than some other kids his age. So that's the general category. There are specific examples within that, like when you have to take a phone call, or when you have something scheduled like this that you want to attend to. So that's going to be the focus of the Plan B conversations. And I'd recommend taking one at a time. For instance, if you have something you want to watch or listen to or need to tomorrow at a certain time, or if you want to take on the phone calls that might come up, you need to take one thing at a time and walk through those 3 ingredients. With a 4.5-year-old, you're going to have to perhaps put some words in his mouth about why it's hard for him to do that. But this is where the mindset's so important, because try not to be thinking of he's just defiant and wants attention and doesn't, wants to get his own way. No, say to yourself, hard for him. This is a challenge for him. And this is what I want him to understand is I get it, that this is hard for him. And I think I'm understanding why it's hard for him to shift. Let's have that out on the table and then ask him to understand why we've got some things that we need to attend to. So then let's go into solution mode. And I think what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to come up with some solutions that he has an active role in. Because what it sounds like to me, which is very hard for a 4.5-year-old, is the world shifts on him and he's got no control over it whatsoever. He needs some control. So he's going to have to come up with a solution that says, when there's a shift like this, here's what I get to do. Here's the solution that I get to enact that is going to also be something intrinsically pleasurable. Because the other thing he's saying to you is, I go from life is good to life sucks immediately, and there's nothing in between. So you're going to have to sort of build a little bit of a ladder to something else there, but he's got to be co-author of that and feel like he's got some control. And you can do that, believe it or not, with a 4.5-year-old. So good luck. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thank you. This question came in towards the beginning of the show when we were talking about skill, not will, and that kids really, the kids that might be having the worst behaviors are actually trying very hard, and asks, does that apply to kids with autism? And also the collaborative problem solving approach, does that apply to kids with autism?
Absolutely. I mean, when you break down different diagnoses, what you'll see is they are often a constellation of delays in the development of crucial skills. And kids on the autism spectrum, they struggle with many of the kinds of skills that I rattled off a few minutes ago: language and communication skills, emotion regulation, self-regulation skills, flexible thinking skills, social thinking skills. So I often tell people that I think kids on the autism spectrum are like the poster children for collaborative problem solving, because they need help developing all of these skills. Now, having said that, if you have kids on the severe end of the autism spectrum, where they have very limited language and communication skills, obviously you need to scaffold this process, and it needs to look a little bit different. So you're not relying on the kid to do so much of the sort of linguistic back and forth. And there are many ways to do that with kids on the severe end of the autism spectrum. But the short answer is yes, we use this approach all the time with kids on the spectrum, very successfully.
Great. We have one more from Susan, and this is kind of also relates to many parents. How do we deal with virtual school refusal? We have a lot of kids just noping out with virtual school. Their pattern had been either picking A or C throughout the year, because you just have to get through the day, I guess, and she's asking, how can we get closer to B?
Yep. Great question. And, you're not alone in pick an A or C. And as I alluded to earlier, we just got to remember that you don't get plan B by the average of A and C. So we have to try to get to plan B. And, what you're going to do is you're going to sit down proactively. This is a really important point. The worst time to solve a predictable problem is when it's happening, right? So like, literally right now upstairs, my high school daughter is coming on and off of her Zooms all of the time. Now, if I go upstairs and find her not on Zoom when she should be, that's the worst time for me to be doing plan B. So you don't want to do what I call emergency B. You want to do proactive B. So that means catch your kid when there's no computer near, there's no Zoom expectations, when they're in sort of their best space. Don't sit down and have this like eyes locked on each other, intense conversation that's so dysregulating. Have some movement, take a walk, throw a ball, have a snack, do something, be in the car, something regulating, and then follow those 3 ingredients proactively. And start right off the bat by saying, hey, you know what? I am sure that there's a very good reason that you haven't been doing remote school. So you're not in trouble here. I really just want to understand as much as I possibly can. And I would actually suggest in this case, if you've been finding it hard to get Plan B off the ground, only do the first ingredient of Plan B, okay? Skip the other two for now. So say to yourself, all I'm going to do is bring it up. I'm going to ask questions. If they tell me anything, I'm going to reflect what I've heard. If they don't tell me, I'm going to take a bunch of guesses, and I'm going to do a lot of regulating. You're not in trouble. I really just want to understand. I know there must be a good reason that this is happening, and just try to gather information and make that your sole goal of the conversation. And once you hear that, then the next time proactively come back around and remind them of what you learned from them and raise whatever concerns you have. But my other piece of advice here, two other pieces of advice, try to get clear about what your concern is, okay? You're supposed to be on Zoom isn't good enough. We have to be more specific. What are we worried about if they're not doing their remote school? So we got to get specific about that. And then my third piece of advice is for us parents, it's a hard one to solve when it's actually not our school that's gone remote. In other words, we actually need some partnership from the educators here, because they're the ones who are going to be able to help enact any potential solutions. So what I recommend there is facilitating Plan B with the teachers as well. And I do a ton of work in schools. And let me tell you, our educators, they understand so well how enormously challenging this is. And they are not judging our kids who have been withdrawing. And in fact, these are the kids who used to be sort of disruptive sometimes in the classroom. Mm-hmm. Now they're just disengaging.
Yeah.
It's just a different flavor.
Absolutely.
So, hope
absolutely.
That's
it absolutely is. I know we're short on time. Thank you, Dr. Ablon, for answering these questions. I mean, it is a hot topic and conversation. I can see some people hopping on late. If you missed the first part of the show, the recording is always available on our Facebook page or on YouTube. And we can also post some answers in the chat. Don't forget about our Mom Squad. That's another place to get your questions answered. That's our private Facebook group, Mom Squad. You can find it on our Facebook page or by searching Facebook groups, SLC Mom Squad. That's a community of parents with kids and teens with learning and attention challenges.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ablon, for being with us on LD Expert Live and for the incredible work that you're doing for families and kids dealing with behavioral challenges.
Well, thank you so much for having me. You know, an hour always seems like a long time, as we talked about in the beginning, but man, does it fly by.
It does.
We didn't get to all the questions. I know you're going to talk about some resources next for people. So if you want to learn more about this approach, get support, we do have a bunch of things to offer, including Zoom, speaking of Zoom, virtual parent classes as well that are offered monthly. So there's some ways that we can support folks out there. So thanks everybody for joining. I hope it's helpful. Jill, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. And here is Dr. Ablon's contact information. Do check out his website for more about his books, speaking, his approach for changing behavior in lives. And it sounds like there are some other resources there that he just mentioned, some Zoom support groups and things. So be sure and check out his website for information about those things. Thank you for joining us for this replay of Stuart Ablon's common sense approach to behavior change. This is a session worth watching over and over. Next Tuesday, our guest will be 𝗕𝗫𝗀𝗀 the host of the Neurodiversity podcast. We're going to be talking about tools for affirming our neurodiverse learners and empowering them to build emotional regulation. This is going to be a wonderful discussion. So be sure and join us on LD Expert Live next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific. At Stowell Learning Centers, we work with children and adults doing targeted brain training to permanently eliminate the struggles associated with dyslexia, auditory processing, and other learning differences so that students can become independent learners and thrive in school. If you would like a free consultation for yourself or your child, give us a call or visit our website at stowellcenter.com. Hey everyone, happy Thanksgiving and we'll see you next Tuesday for Neurodiversity and Emotional Regulation with Emily Kircher Morris.